What many said would be a walkover for seven-time debater Donald Trump seemingly turned out to be Kamala Harris's night. The vice president seemed to set the tone for the big night as soon as it started when she walked over to Trump for a handshake, something that he wasn't expecting and what we didn't see during the debate with Biden in June. There were arguments, sharp retorts, repetitive lines, frowns, some great one-liners, and a whole lot of what the debate experts call Gip Gallop, which is a reference to overwhelming your opponent with several arguments at once. But aside from all the theatrics of the big debate, several key issues were talked about. Starting with, of course, abortion. While Kamala reiterated her stance of standing by women's rights on their bodies, Trump asserted that he will not ban abortion and claimed that women in their 9th month of pregnancy are getting abortions. While attacking the Democrats on illegal immigration, Trump accused Kamala and Biden administration of getting in illegal immigrants who, quote, eat our pets. He also reasserted that he will strengthen border security. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, seemed to suggest granting citizenship to undocumented immigrants. Kamala defended the government's Russia-Ukraine war policy and hit out at Donald Trump, telling him that dictators like him because they can manipulate him and that they will, quote, eat him for lunch. Donald Trump retorted that the whole world is blowing up and that she is the worst negotiator. Meanwhile, on his alleged involvement in the Capitol Hill attack, Trump said that he has nothing to do with it. Clearly, the debate has left Americans divided, with the Republicans accusing the moderators of being biased towards Kamala Harris. It's still a long way to go for November 5th, but who's won the game right now? Let me ask my guests on the show. Joining me tonight are Nish Acharya. He's a former director of innovation for President Obama and the current outside advisor to the Biden administration. I'm also joined by Vibhuti Jha, former Republican candidate for New York Assembly. Good evening. Namaskar to both of you. I'll start with you, Vibhuti Jha. What do you make of this entire debate? It was something that not just Americans, but the entire world was looking at. Everybody who follows American politics was eager to hear what both of them have to say. But did you also think that it clearly went in favor of Kamala Harris?
Thank you very much for having me here, Shreya. I wanted to also mention this fact that I have always believed, and I say this to my party people, that recognize this element that Democrats are tactically way too smart than the Republicans. I say this openly. So there was a tactical game played here, and Kamala Harris won that tactical play. I acknowledge that. As a sportsman, I always acknowledge win or lose, doesn't matter. But one has to look at it from a very different perspective. And my perspective is that debates are not meant for hardliners on either side of the fence. Either side of the fence have already decided to vote for Trump or Biden, as the case may be. These debates are primarily meant for the undecided, the fence sitters, and independents, who essentially are what they are because they are not aligned to any party. So in the US election, which is a very beautiful process here, which the rest of the world doesn't know or doesn't understand, there is a primary election to select the party candidate. And in the primary elections, they woo the party line to win the nomination. Once the nomination is won, then you quote the independent and others. In this battle, the perception battle was clearly with Kamala Harris, because she looked below, as Elon Musk also said, the expectation set was so low that you could not go below that. You could only be better. Whereas,
do you think, Vibhuti Jha, that overconfidence is perhaps what went against Donald Trump?
Sorry? Your question again?
Do you think that overconfidence is something that went against Donald Trump?
It was not overconfidence, but he was definitely warned, I think, in my opinion, not to attack Kamala personally, nor refer to anything else, because that would boomerang. So he maintained a very stoic stand that I will not attack you in person, but on policies. And that's what he did. So win or lose, the question will be how the independents, neutrals, and undecided voters are thinking about this, because those people are looking for policies, not the flash and the bang around here. So Kamala Harris was clearly ahead in the
Okay.
perception game. Trump clearly won the policy game. And by the way, this is something which you and I are both in media. And I want to say ABC was the biggest loser because they were totally partisan. They were trying to ensnare Trump in answering questions which did not merit. And when they failed, they repeated the question, two in point, repeatedly asked, who do you want to win the war, Ukraine or Russia? That is such a stupid way to trap somebody in saying one or the other. And Trump was smart enough to say, I want to end the war. Likewise, there were other instances as
Let
well.
me get Nish Acharya to
That's what I would
respond
say.
to you, Vibhuti Jha. Nish Acharya, this was something that the Republicans and several people across the world online have been saying, that the moderators were biased towards Kamala and therefore she had that sort of advantage over Donald Trump.
So we have a saying in basketball, which is you cannot blame the referee if you're not making your own jump shots. And so blaming the moderators is an example of a debate that was lost by former President Trump. I think Vice President Harris had two goals last night. The first was to show that she was presidential, that she could stand on the stage and have a commanding presence. I think, to use an Indian term, she hit a sixer on that one. It showed how presidential she is. And then secondly, I think she needed to show that Donald Trump, in fact, could not handle the pressure of multiple global crises. And there again, I think she showed that that's the case. Every time she brought up an issue, he was unable to give a coherent answer. I reject this idea that he won on policy. I think she won on substance, on toughness, and on policy. I think she gave very good answers on women's health and abortion. She gave a very good answer on why the Afghanistan situation happened. I think she gave a very good answer on economic growth and how we came out of the COVID-led inflation and other things, and actually we're on our way back. And so I think
Okay,
she
Nish
actually
Acharya,
overall
you
did
mentioned
almost nothing wrong.
Afghanistan, and since we're talking about policies, let me understand from you. Kamala Harris hit out at Donald Trump for negotiating with the Taliban, for inviting them for talks. In a war, if there is a group which is carrying out the activity on ground, which is violent, you talk to that particular group, don't you? For example, in the Russia-Ukraine war, Donald Trump said that you're only talking to Zelensky, not to Putin. How do you want this war to end when you're talking to only one side?
Right, but there's intermediaries to go through. The Taliban, I had actually a close family member who served in Afghanistan, and I can tell you how stressful it is for American families that the U.S. military has been there for over 20 years. And so there was a need to get closure on the war. The Trump administration was not able to do that. And with the agreement that they negotiated with the Taliban was coming to a close. And so unfortunately, the Biden administration was in a situation where it either had to leave Afghanistan or significant fighting was going to resume. And so the decision was made, and unfortunately, there were American lives lost, there were Afghan lives lost, and it wasn't the best situation. But it was a decision to leave Afghanistan, and it was a decision based on prior agreements. And so that has to be done. Now, the situation with Russia is obviously very different. Russia is a very large country. It is a superpower, and it has been threatening Ukraine and other European countries. And so the strategic decision there is very different than it is in a small country like Afghanistan. And I'm sure that once she is elected, Vice President Harris will meet with President Putin, and she will push for some sort of a negotiation there. But that'll also depend on whether the Russians are interested
But
in that.
interestingly,
I can't speak
Nish
with any
Acharya,
knowledge.
when this was being talked about, Donald Trump said that this war wouldn't have happened if I were the president. And certainly we have seen that during the Biden administration, we've seen both the Russia-Ukraine as well as the Israel-Hamas war. With that in mind, the retort that Kamala Harris gave was, dictators like you because they can manipulate you and they will, quote, eat you for lunch. Is that a very solid, substantial argument to put in place when you're being accused of being involved in two wars?
Well, I think if you talk to most international affairs experts, they will tell you that countries do not go to war based on who the American president is. It's based on what they are seeking to do and also what the reaction will be. And perhaps Putin thought that the United States would not respond. The United States responded strongly and built an alliance and has kept that alliance supporting Ukraine. And Donald Trump, again, was wrong last night. The Europeans have actually given more money than the United States to it. So it is really a global coalition. And so I don't think that that's true. I think there's a question about the how Donald Trump would react, whether he would use nuclear weapons, which he insinuated last night. And so countries may be a little bit worried about that. But certainly I don't think anybody makes their decision on war or peace based on US presidential elections.
Okay. Vibhuti Jha, would you like to come in on this? Do you think that how Kamala Harris put forth the arguments in the debate about the two wars would convince the voter on ground that it was necessary and that, because there's been considerable anti-war sentiment and there have been people urging the US government to stop both wars, do you think that will sort of reach out to the undecided voters and convince them?
And the undecided voters are absolutely annoyed and frustrated and unhappy with the unnecessary wars that United States has gotten into. And that is an absolute clear fact. People are tired, sick of it. I mean, think about Lieutenant Colonel Tulsi Gabbard has said that it is the war machine of America that launches war. And she blames both parties for that from time to time. But I wanted to just comment on the basketball analogy that Acharya ji brought out is that, yeah, you have to make your jump shots, Acharya ji, but the referees also call the ticky-tack fouls, which prevent somebody from taking those shots and not calling the shots falsely. We know the game. So let's not go into the basketball analogy because there are so many analogies I have about sports that I can quote you here. But on the policy perspective, the Ukraine thing, think about it. If I were Biden, I was in Biden's position. And if I found that Trump has done a poor negotiation for getting out of the war, I would have said, sorry, no, I will renegotiate that deal. But to do it and then blame him for doing what, that's not a sign of leadership. That's cowardice. The way they left and ran from Afghanistan. It's global knowledge. It's not anybody, me telling or you asking, how did US looked sick and tired. I was disappointed to see the kind of escape hatch these people used to run away from Afghanistan, leaving behind $80 billion worth of weapons, sophisticated weapon, under the custody of Taliban, whom they are paying monthly rental now to manage it properly. Ukraine is another issue. This is what the Biden administration doesn't answer, that in Israel's case, which is a winnable war against Hamas, US is telling Israel not to fight. And here they are doing in Ukraine, hundreds of billions of dollars, over $200 billion have been pumped in to support American industries. It's a very interesting scenario. And you are telling Ukraine to go win with an unwinnable war, which Acharya ji said, Soviet Union will not lose the war because in a desperate situation, they can go to any extent to do that. So they are supporting an unwinnable war against Russia, but discouraging Israel from winning and winnable war by cutting down their supply chain of weapons. This is the hoax. This is the stupidity. This is the banality of Democratic Party thinking that needs to be addressed. And I can tell you this, the independents, undecided, and neutral people are looking at that very seriously. And Trump did not start a single war
Nish Acharya,
in
you
his
want to
regime,
respond to
nor
what
was
Mr.
he a
Jha is
dictator
saying
in the
regarding the entire duality of the Biden administration and, of course, the alleged American hypocrisy that people across the world have been calling out regarding these two wars?
Well, I would say there's two things to say there. One is there's no American troops in either war. So they are not American wars. There were troops in Afghanistan. There were troops in Iraq. Again, people that I know, they were fighting. That is not the case in either war. The United States is supporting Ukraine because Ukraine has been a democracy, a fledgling democracy that's had stronger ties with the West. And the Russians have shown an interest in further expanding beyond Ukraine. And so it was important to support Ukraine in its struggle.
Okay.
The situation in Israel and Gaza, the United States has given, I think, $26 billion to Israel. It hasn't given any money to the Palestinians. However, it understands that the situation in Israel and Gaza is not tenable with Israel continuing to attack and certainly with a lot of loss of civilian life. And so Vice President Harris is trying to essentially figure out how to get both sides to the table and how to get a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza. And certainly Israel has a right to defend itself after the terrible attacks of October 7th. But also it needs to find a way to prevent human suffering, and it needs to find a pathway forward for Gaza that's the case. And so I think that's what she's trying to do. I don't think there's any hypocrisy on the American side for that. And one quick thing, the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post today corrected that fact about Afghanistan. It was only about $7 billion worth of equipment that was left, not 85 billion. So significant difference in terms of what was left behind.
Okay, I want to shift our focus to abortion, which is one of the dominant issues in this entire presidential campaign. Mr. Jha, let me understand from you what you think of how Donald Trump responded to this entire abortion debate. Kamala Harris, well known a champion of women's rights, she has been reiterating what she stood for and how she fought in this entire case. Donald Trump's argument in this case, seemed like a very shoddy sort of an argument when he said that, women are going for abortion in their 9th month of pregnancy. I mean, first of all, that's medically incorrect. Second of all, why can't you just say that, I do not support abortion, or just that women have rights on their own bodies?
That is one issue on which Republicans are generally weak in explaining the whole problem. This is what is critical. Nobody, even the pro-lifers are, for example, I'm against abortion, all right? But I definitely recognize the need for abortion in cases of exceptional scenarios happen. God forbid, if my daughter were to be raped by an Islamist guy, I wouldn't want that child on this planet Earth. I would allow her the liberty to take her decision to choice. The choice is hers. The issue is very important here. Abortion is an issue of once upon a time scenario versus today's scenario. Today, you have any number of birth control facilities available, options available, and responsibility available. Nobody talks about that component of it. So but by the way, the 9-month thing that you talked about, the West Virginia governor did say this. I have heard it myself. I don't need to quote anybody on that. I heard it myself when he said in a public forum that we will decide the child's life after if the baby is born. That's what Trump was quoting about. And I'm told that in 6 or 7 states, late-stage abortions are allowed. Now, considerations are very important. Mother's life, I support it. If mother's life is endangered, child's life is endangered, or exceptional circumstances, this has to be allowed. But a lot of people don't understand. The rest of the world gets confused about the abortion matter. A whole lot of things in this country are on federal structure. You may be surprised to know that just because you have a brokerage license or a license to do something in New York, you can't do in New Jersey. You have to have New Jersey license for a stockbroker or insurance agent. Likewise, to open an office in Wisconsin or California, each state has its own authority to do something. California has the rule, they allow illegal immigrants to vote in local elections. These are the state matters, and that's where the whole thing, that it need not be a national mandate. Let each state decide it, throw the matter back to the states, and which I feel is reasonable enough. But one matter which is missed out, and nobody talks about it, the young men and women where these unwanted pregnancies happen, they need to be made available with birth control support systems, whether it's pills or pills. Because you have a responsibility to make sure that you do not indulge in practices that lead to unwanted pregnancy. That education is not happening here. So if you are indulging in sexual practice and it ends up in pregnancy, you will say, oh, I'll get my abortion done. That's the one thing which has to be talked about in a more social,
Okay.
germane way than instead of just throwing my right, my body, which is true. Nobody contesting that. Nobody's contesting that. So
Okay.
that's the issue here. You can do it, any state that can do. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Nish Acharya, illegal immigration, a point and issue that was talked about extensively, that was debated extensively, not just in the debate, but throughout this campaign. We've seen Republicans and Democrats being deeply divided on it, and something perhaps many observers say will go against the Democrats because it is in their regime, it is during their time that the highest number of undocumented immigrants have been recorded there, have been entering the United States.
However, that fact has to be clarified a little bit. Under every president, the number of illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants coming to the United States has gone up. So Trump was more than Obama, Biden is more than Trump. And there's a couple of factors at play here. One is the economies in Central America, where there's a lot of drugs, there's a lot of gangs, governments are unstable, so people are looking for a better life. And so they're making their way to the United States. And we do not have a good system for evaluating and vetting those people to come in. And so that's been a challenge. The second challenge is that immigration is not one size fits all. We have highly educated immigrants coming from India. We also have the second largest group coming to the Mexican border are also Indians, and they're trying to come illegally. And so obviously, using the example of Indians, we can see that this is a complex issue. Now, what the Biden administration proposed and what they came to an agreement with the United States Senate, with the conservative Republican senators, was to significantly increase the amount of border patrol, the amount of people who are actually even let in for a hearing on a day-to-day basis, and the use of technology to monitor the border. And it was President Trump who decided that he would not accept that and convince the Republican colleagues not to vote. So that's actually, we would have had a bill to strengthen the border if President Trump had been interested in that. And the last thing I'll say is, I think it's important to know that this is not, again, this is a complicated issue. If a family comes to the U.S. border seeking asylum because they've been politically persecuted or religiously persecuted, the American culture for 250 years has been to give them a chance to tell their story and to possibly get asylum in the United States. And so at no point will we be closing the doors entirely and not letting anybody in. We will have a system. Now, is the system broken? Yes, the system is broken, and we don't have a way to quickly do that. But systems can be fixed. And that legislation was an attempt
what's ironic,
to fix it,
Nish Acharya, is also the fact,
wasn't.
and Vibhuti Jha, that the Trump team and the Trump campaign keeps talking about strengthening the border security, but during Trump's regime, there was nothing solid, nothing substantial that was done to block that. But let me quickly, before I wrap this discussion up, ask the both of you, American society, American people stand deeply divided, perhaps the most divided in their history over the politics that has been playing out. Do you think that either Trump or Biden, beg your pardon, or Kamala have that sort of potential in them to unify the nation? Kamala keeps talking about it, Trump keeps talking about it, but when it comes to actual implementation, Vibhuti Jha, who do you think is actually capable of doing that, if at all?
That is a brilliant question in terms of uniting and dividing the country. Everybody talks about uniting, unity. It's a good word. It's a psychological suppressant word where you feel good about being united. But important part here is, who has been dividing the country? Think about it from that perspective. Obama said, we are not red, white, and blue. We are United States of America. But on record, he has been single most devastating, degenerating, dividing the country in the most vicious way. Biden talked about, I'll unite. What did he do to unite? He further damaged the fabric of the country. I had said this in a think tank meeting about 10 years ago. What will destroy this country is the political apathy or the bitterness that exists between the two parties. And this is an issue that they need to address seriously. This is unity comes around the cause.
I have to take in a quick word from Nish Acharya as well. Yeah. Nish Acharya, 30 seconds before I wrap this discussion up then.
So until Donald Trump came onto the stage, there was a lot of collaboration between Democrats and Republicans. There was more of a common definition of what it means to be American. In the last 3 election cycles, that has not been the case because of the words and actions of the Republican nominee. I think whether it's Kamala Harris or in the next 4 years when there's another election, I think both parties and both candidates need to get back to that definition of what is an American
Okay.
and a common set of values and goals that we have. And then we can discuss whether or not there's a role for government or there's a role for private sector. But we need to get back
Okay.
to that area where we have some common agreement about what it means to be an American. And we need that leadership from our
Okay.
candidates for president.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much to both of you gentlemen, Nish Acharya and Vibhuti Jha, for joining us on Mirror Now and sharing your perspective on that big debate that happened between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.